Kareem sat quietly in the courtroom, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the stiff wooden bench. The low hum of voices filled the room, a mix of whispers and the occasional shuffle of papers.
The truth has to come out today,
He thought to himself, trying to steady his breathing. This was not just about child support. It was a battle for his children's future and his reputation as a father. His lawyer leaned over, her voice hushed yet firm. "Are you ready for this, Kareem? Today's the day you prove them all wrong." Kareem nodded, his mind racing back to the events that had led him here. This wasn't just another courtroom drama. This was his life on trial. His eyes drifted across the room to where Emily sat, her expression calm, almost smug. She was dressed sharply, her lawyer whispering instructions in her ear as she nodded along, her face showing none of the turmoil he felt inside. To everyone else, she looked like the image of a devoted mother. But Kareem knew the truth beneath that polished exterior. As he glanced around, he could feel the weight of unspoken judgments in the eyes of the spectators. To them, he was just another man fighting a losing battle, struggling to defend himself against accusations that could ruin him. But they didn't know the sacrifices he'd made, the countless sleepless nights spent caring for his kids, or the loneliness that came with being a single parent when Emily had walked away. "This isn't just about money, Kareem," his lawyer reminded him, breaking into his thoughts. "It's about showing them who you are, a father who never gave up." Kareem took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists at his sides as he tried to focus. He had been through too much to let this slip away now. This courtroom was where he'd fight to reclaim his role in his children's lives, to challenge the story Emily was trying to sell. The stakes couldn't be higher, and he knew that every word, every piece of evidence presented today could shape the future. As the judge prepared to begin the proceedings, the room fell into a tense silence. Kareem could feel his heartbeat echoing in his chest, each beat a reminder of what he stood to lose if things didn't go his way. The judge, with his stern expression and gavel resting heavily on the desk, signaled the start of the hearing, and Kareem braced himself for the fight ahead. Kareem's thoughts drifted back to a simpler time, a time before the courtroom battles and accusations. He remembered when he and Emily first met in college, a whirlwind romance that caught them both by surprise. Kareem had always been the focused one, determined to make something of himself, while Emily was the life of every party, her laugh echoing through the crowded halls. He couldn't help but smile faintly at the memory of their first date. They had sat on a bench under a campus tree, talking for hours. Emily had looked at him with that spark in her eyes, the kind that made him believe they could build something special. She'd said,
"You're different, Kareem. You're steady. I need that in my life."
And for a while, they balanced each other perfectly. Kareem's grounded nature matched Emily's free spirit, creating a dynamic that seemed unbreakable. After they graduated, life moved fast. They had their first child not long after, and the carefree days of late-night parties turned into sleepless nights with bottles and diapers. Kareem threw himself into fatherhood with a sense of purpose he had never known before. He loved the routine, waking up early to feed the baby, reading bedtime stories, even the chaotic mornings rushing to daycare before heading to work. He felt like he had found his true calling. "This is what matters," he used to tell Emily during their late-night talks when the baby was asleep. "We're building something real, something lasting." At first, Emily seemed to share his vision. She was there through the sleepless nights, the messy kitchen counters, and the baby's endless cries. But gradually, things began to change. Where Kareem saw a future, a family they were building together, Emily began to see something else. To her, their life had become a routine, a trap she couldn't escape. The argument started small. Emily would roll her eyes when Kareem insisted on sticking to a bedtime schedule.
"Why does everything have to be so rigid with you, Kareem?"
She would snap, pulling her jacket over her shoulders as she headed out for yet another night with friends. Kareem would try to explain his need for structure, his belief in the importance of consistency for their child's sake. But Emily wasn't interested in hearing it. She wanted space, freedom, the kind they used to have before the responsibilities piled up. As time went on, the distance between them grew. Emily spent more nights out, leaving Kareem home with the kids. He would pace the living room, waiting for the sound of the door unlocking, hoping she would come home before midnight. She rarely did, and when she did show up, her eyes red from too many drinks. She'd brush off his concerns with a dismissive,
"You're always overreacting. It's just one night. The kids are fine."
But Kareem knew better. He could see the cracks widening, see how much she resented the life they had built together. He tried to hold on, tried to be patient, But every time he saw the empty look in her eyes, he felt a little piece of their future slip away. The final straw came one night when Emily didn't come home at all. Kareem had stayed up, pacing the living room floor, his frustration growing with every hour that passed. When she finally walked through the door the next morning, suitcase in hand, she didn't even seem surprised to see him waiting.
I need a break, Kareem.
She said, her voice flat and emotionless.
I can't do this anymore. You've got it all under control anyway.
Kareem felt his heart twist in his chest.
You can't just leave Emily. We have kids. They need their mother.
Emily shrugged, a faint smirk playing on her lips as she grabbed the handle of her suitcase.
They have you. You're good at this. Better than me anyway.
And just like that, she was gone, leaving Kareem to pick up the pieces. He stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty driveway, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew deep down that their life would never be the same again. Kareem couldn't shake the feeling that he was living in someone else's life. The home he had built with Emily felt emptier now, even though the children's laughter still echoed through the hallways. He had become used to the silence that replaced their once lively conversations, the late nights alone, waiting for a wife who barely seemed to want to be a part of their lives anymore. The change had been gradual at first. Emily would stay out a little later each week, first for work events, then for nights out with friends. Kareem tried to understand, tried to give her the space she seemed to crave, but soon those nights turned into entire weekends. She would call to check in, her voice breezy and detached. You're doing great with the kids, Kareem. I'll be back before you know it. But she wasn't back before he knew it. Most weekends, she wouldn't return until Sunday night, smelling faintly of perfume and alcohol, eyes glazed over with the remnants of late-night parties. Kareem, exhausted from playing both roles, would try to hide his frustration, biting back the questions that gnawed at him. He didn't want to fight, not in front of the kids. One evening, he couldn't hold it in any longer. After putting the kids to bed, he found Emily in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine.
Do you even care about being here anymore?
He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, trying to keep the hurt from seeping through. Emily rolled her eyes, leaning against the counter.
Not everything is about you, Kareem. Sometimes I just need to breathe. You're so suffocating with your routines and your rules.
Kareem felt his chest tighten, the weight of her words pressing down on him.
Suffocating? Emily, we have a family. Our kids need stability, structure. They need both of us.
She turned away, taking a long sip from her glass before muttering,
Maybe I'm just not cut out for this kind of life, Kareem. Maybe you're better off without me trying to keep up.
And there it was, the unspoken truth that had lingered between them for months. Kareem's jaw clenched as he struggled to find the right words.
We're supposed to be in this together, Emily. We made promises to each other, to our kids.
But Emily just shrugged, her expression distant.
Promises change, Kareem. People change.
She left the room, leaving him standing there alone, the silence settling around him like a heavy blanket. The next few months were a blur of solo parenting and strained conversations. Kareem juggled his job, the kids' school runs, and the endless cycle of meals and bedtimes. He couldn't remember the last time he had slept through the night without waking up to check on the kids or replaying their arguments in his mind. Meanwhile, Emily seemed to drift further away, even when she was physically present. It was as if she had one foot out the door, always looking for an escape. Then came the night that everything changed. Emily returned home late, much later than usual. Kareem was sitting on the living room couch, his hands clenched into fists, fighting the rising tide of anger. When she finally walked through the door, she barely met his eyes. We need to talk, Kareem said, his voice tense.
This isn't working. You're hardly here anymore. And the kids...
I don't want to have this conversation right now, Kareem.
She interrupted, her voice sharp.
I'm tired.
You're always tired.
He shot back, the frustration spilling over.
Do you even care what this is doing to us? To them?
Emily sighed, a weary look crossing her face.
Maybe I just need time. A break from all of this.
Kareem stared at her, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He could feel the last threads of hope slipping away.
A break? From your family? Is that what you really want, Emily?
She met his gaze, her expression unreadable.
Yes, Kareem. I think it's what I need.
And just like that, the door that had been slowly closing between them finally shut. Emily left a few days later, suitcase in hand, with nothing more than a promise to figure things out, and an unspoken agreement that Kareem would keep the house running in her absence. He watched her drive away, his heart heavy with the realization that the life they had built together was crumbling beyond repair. Now, all that was left were the routines he had come to rely on. The school drop-offs, the late-night homework sessions, the bedtime stories. He became both mother and father, the steady presence his kids could count on. But even as he tried to focus on the life in front of him, the hurt lingered. Emily was gone, but her absence was a shadow that followed Kareem through every moment of his new reality. After Emily left, Kareem quickly learned just how much his life had changed. The days were long and the nights even longer, but he didn't have the luxury of letting his exhaustion show. He had 2 young lives depending on him, 2 little faces that needed his reassurance that everything would be okay, even when he wasn't sure himself. There was no time to dwell on what he had lost. There were lunches to pack, school projects to finish, and a million other little things that kept the household running. Every morning, Kareem woke before the sun, tiptoeing around the house to get breakfast ready before waking the kids. He'd sit at the edge of their beds, gently nudging them awake.
Hey, sleepyhead, time to get up.
He'd say with a smile, masking the tiredness in his voice. The kids would groan and roll over, but eventually they'd shuffle out of bed and into the kitchen where the scent of pancakes filled the air. "Can you put extra syrup on mine, Daddy?" his youngest would ask, her eyes bright with a smile that made every early morning worth it.
You got it, kiddo.
He'd reply, pouring syrup with a flourish that made her giggle. These small moments, the little rituals of their new life, became the glue that held them together. The school run was always a mad dash, stuffing lunches into backpacks, tying shoelaces, and trying to keep the kids from arguing in the back seat. But as hectic as it was, Kareem cherished these moments. He'd listen to them chatter about their day, sharing stories about their friends and teachers. They didn't know it, but their laughter helped fill the silence that Emily had left behind. After dropping them off, he'd head to work, juggling emails and deadlines. But his thoughts were never far from home. He worried constantly, worried if they were adjusting, if they missed their mother, if they were truly happy. It was a weight he carried with him everywhere, one that only grew heavier as the months passed. At night, Kareem's routine continued. Dinner, baths, homework. He'd sit at the kitchen table, helping his older child with math problems he hadn't seen in years, while the younger one doodled at his side. When bedtime came, he'd tuck them in, reading from their favorite storybooks, his voice low and soothing. One night, as he closed the book, his son looked up at him, his face serious. "Daddy, do you think Mom's coming back?" Kareem felt his heart clench, but he kept his expression steady. "I don't know, buddy, but I'm here, and that's what matters, right?" His son nodded, but Kareem could see the uncertainty in his eyes. It was the hardest part, knowing he couldn't fix everything, that he couldn't erase the questions that lingered in their young minds. But he had made a promise to himself that he would be there, no matter what. He wasn't going to let them feel like they were missing out on anything, even if he had to do it all alone. As the weeks turned into months, Kareem found a rhythm in their new life. It wasn't easy. There were nights when he collapsed onto the couch after putting the kids to bed, too tired to even think, but he never let himself complain. This was his family, and he was determined to make it work, even if it meant being the only one holding everything together. He managed the school conferences, the doctor's appointments, the birthday parties, and all the little moments that most people took for granted. He watched as his children grew, their smiles returning little by little, their laughter becoming more genuine. He clung to those moments of joy, letting them fuel him through the tough days. But even as he poured everything he had into being a father, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still fighting a battle, one that went beyond the everyday struggles of parenthood. Emily's absence loomed over them like a shadow, and every missed call or brief, impersonal text from her reminded him that this wasn't the way things were supposed to be. Still, Kareem found strength in the small victories. His daughter's laughter as he spun her around in the living room, his son's pride when they finished a challenging homework assignment together, the way they hugged him tight at the end of each day, their arms wrapped around his neck like they never wanted to let go. "You're doing a good job, Dad," his son told him one night, unprompted, as they sat watching TV together. Kareem felt a lump form in his throat, but he managed a smile. "Thanks, kiddo. That means more than you know." It was those moments that reminded him of why he kept going, even when the weight of single parenthood threatened to overwhelm him. He wasn't just fighting for his kids, he was fighting to prove, to himself and to the world, that he could be enough for them, that they could have a life filled with love and stability, even if their family didn't look like it once had. And every day, he told himself that as long as he kept trying, as long as he kept showing up, they'd make it through, together. Kareem had never imagined that things would escalate to this point. He thought the hardest part of Emily leaving was getting through each day, holding the family together. But when he received the official-looking envelope from the courthouse, he realized just how wrong he was. Inside was a notice. Emily was taking him to court for child support and custody. It felt like a punch to the gut, knocking the breath out of him. She's claiming she's been the primary caregiver, Kareem's lawyer explained during their first meeting, disbelief in her voice. She says you've been absent, but that you haven't contributed to the kids' well-being. Kareem stared at her, his mind reeling.
That's not true. She left. I've been the one raising them, every single day.
His voice shook with frustration, but deep down, he felt a pang of fear. He knew how these things could go, how easily the story could be twisted. I believe you, Kareem, his lawyer said, her expression softening. But this is going to be tough. The court doesn't always see what's really happening. We're going to have to prove your side of the story. And so, the real battle began. Kareem found himself back in the courtroom, but this time, it wasn't just his heart on the line. It was his children's future. As he walked into the courthouse, he could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. He was keenly aware of how he might be seen. Just another father fighting to avoid his responsibilities. But he knew the truth, and he held on to that with everything he had. Emily arrived with a confident stride, her lawyer at her side. She wore a perfectly tailored suit, her makeup flawless. She greeted Kareem with a tight-lipped smile that sent a chill down his spine. To everyone else, she looked like the picture of a devoted mother, struggling to do her best. But Kareem could see the calculation in her eyes, the determination to win at any cost. The proceedings began, and Emily's lawyer wasted no time painting a bleak picture of Kareem's supposed neglect. Miss Smith has been the one caring for the children since the separation, her lawyer declared, his voice smooth and persuasive. She has provided for them, been their emotional support, while Mr. Johnson has been absent. Kareem's fists clenched under the table, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to stand up, to shout the truth, but he knew his time would come, and he had to stay calm. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him, could almost hear their thoughts, wondering if the man before them fit the stereotype they had in their minds. Emily took the stand, tears shining in her eyes as she dabbed at them with a tissue.
I've done everything I can,
She said, her voice trembling.
but it's so hard, Your Honor. I've had to do it all on my own, while Kareem has barely been around.
Her words hung in the air, heavy with accusation, and Kareem felt the sting of each one like a slap to the face. He glanced at his lawyer, who gave him a reassuring nod. It's our turn soon, she whispered. Stay strong. When Kareem finally took the stand, he tried to steady his breathing, tried to push back the anger and hurt that threatened to spill over. He knew that this moment was his chance to set the record straight. As he looked out over the courtroom, he saw Emily's eyes boring into him, challenging him to keep his composure. Tell us about your role in your children's lives since the separation, his lawyer began, her voice clear and direct. Kareem took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest.
I've been there for them every day.
He said, his words simple but firm.
I make their breakfast. I take them to school. I help them with their homework. When they're sick, I'm the one taking care of them. I've been the one raising them because Emily left.
There was a murmur through the courtroom, a shift in the air as Kareem's words started to challenge the narrative Emily had built. He saw the judge's expression change slightly, a raised eyebrow, a glance toward the evidence his lawyer had presented. School records, doctor's visits, statements from neighbors who had seen him with the kids every day. Kareem's lawyer stepped forward, holding up a stack of documents. These records show that Mr. Johnson has been the one attending every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment. We have affidavits from neighbors confirming that the children have been living with him full-time since Miss Smith left. Kareem could feel a shift, a crack in the story Emily had tried to sell, but he knew better than to get his hopes up too soon. The court's biases ran deep, and he could see it in the way the jury eyed him, still unsure whether to believe the man standing before them. Emily's lawyer tried to undermine his words, but each time, Kareem held his ground.
I don't care about proving anything other than this. I love my kids, and I've done everything I can to give them a stable, loving home.
His voice wavered slightly, but he refused to let the emotion break through. Not yet. As the day wore on, the tension in the courtroom grew thicker. Kareem knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt like he had a chance. Like maybe, just maybe, the truth would be enough. He watched as the judge flipped through the documents, saw the way the evidence seemed to make him pause, considering things he hadn't before. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, that small glimmer of hope was all Kareem had to hold on to. Kareem's heart pounded in his chest as he took the stand, feeling every eye in the courtroom fixed on him. He knew what they were expecting: another absent father, another man making excuses. But he wasn't going to let Emily's lies define him. He adjusted the microphone, taking a deep breath to steady his voice. "Tell us, Mr. Johnson," his lawyer began, her voice steady and encouraging. "What has your role been in your children's lives since the separation?" Kareem leaned forward slightly, his voice firm. "I've been their father, the one who wakes them up every morning, makes their breakfast, and gets them ready for school. I take them to their doctor's appointments, I help them with their homework, and I make sure they have everything they need." He paused, looking directly at the judge, trying to make his words count. "I've been the one taking care of them every single day since Emily left." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Kareem could see the way people shifted in their seats, as if his words were breaking through the assumptions they'd brought into the room. He glanced at the jury, catching a few skeptical expressions, but also some that seemed to soften, taking in his side of the story for the first time. His lawyer approached the bench, holding up a stack of documents. "Your Honor, I'd like to present these as evidence. These are school records showing that Mr. Johnson has been the one attending every parent-teacher meeting for the past year. We also have medical records that prove he's the one who has taken the children to all of their appointments, and affidavits from neighbors and teachers who can testify that the children have been living with him full-time." The judge accepted the documents, flipping through the pages with a furrowed brow. The quiet rustling of paper filled the courtroom, every turn of the page adding to the tension. For a moment, Kareem held his breath, watching the judge's expression shift ever so slightly, a hint of surprise crossing his face. Emily sat across the room, her expression carefully controlled, but Kareem could see the way her jaw tightened, the flash of something in her eyes. Maybe fear, maybe frustration. She was good at playing her part, but the evidence was starting to chip away at the story she had crafted. Kareem's lawyer continued, pressing forward with the momentum. "Mr. Johnson, can you explain to the court why you haven't sought child support from Miss Smith during this time?" Kareem nodded, his voice growing stronger with each word.
Because it was never about money for me. It was about my kids. I didn't want to drag them through a legal battle. I just wanted to be there for them, to make sure they had a stable home.
He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in.
But I can't stand by while their mother paints me as someone who abandoned them. I've been there every step of the way.
The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Kareem could feel the weight of his own truth pressing down on him, but he kept his gaze steady. He wasn't going to back down now, not when everything he'd fought for was on the line. The judge set the documents aside, his expression more thoughtful than before.
"Mr. Johnson,"
he said slowly,
"it appears that your role in your children's lives has been more significant than initially presented. Why hasn't this evidence been brought forward until now?"
Kareem took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully.
With all due respect, Your Honor, I didn't think I had to prove myself as a father. I thought it would be enough to just be there, day in and day out, taking care of my kids. But I realize now, that's not how things work.
He glanced at Emily, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I didn't want this to turn into a fight. I didn't want to bring all of this to court, but I couldn't let my kids believe a lie about their father. They deserved to know that I was there for them." A quiet buzz of whispers swept through the courtroom, but the judge silenced them with a wave of his hand. For a moment, he seemed to study Kareem, as if weighing the sincerity of his words against the accusations that had been laid before the court. Emily's lawyer, sensing the shift, quickly stood up, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor, my client has provided evidence of financial hardship." But the judge held up a hand, cutting him off.
"I've seen the evidence, counselor, and I've also seen the evidence that suggests Mr. Johnson has been the primary caregiver. This is not a simple case, and I intend to get to the bottom of it."
Kareem allowed himself a small breath of relief. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, he felt like the truth was finally being heard. He knew that more questions would come, that Emily's lawyer would try to tear him down, but he was ready. He had faced sleepless nights, endless worries, and the constant fear that he wasn't enough for his kids. A courtroom couldn't scare him more than that. As he stepped down from the stand, he caught Emily's eye. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the uncertainty flicker across her face. Kareem didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing for certain. He had fought for his kids with everything he had, and he wasn't going to stop now. As the court took a brief recess, the tension in the room seemed to follow Kareem into the hallway. He stepped out, trying to catch his breath, but the weight of everything still hung heavy on his shoulders. The battle wasn't over yet, and he knew that when they went back inside, the stakes would be even higher. He spotted Emily standing by a window at the end of the hall, her arms crossed, her gaze distant as she stared out into the city below. For a moment, he thought about walking away, letting things play out in the courtroom without trying to reason with her. But then he thought about their kids, their confusion, their questions, their hope that somehow their parents could find a way through this. He couldn't just let it all unravel without at least trying. He approached her slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. "Emily," he called softly, stopping a few feet away. She turned, her expression shifting from surprise to a guarded look that Kareem had become all too familiar with.
What do you want, Kareem?
She asked, her tone flat, uninterested. Kareem took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. "I just want to talk, just for a minute. What we're doing to each other, it's not right. It's not what's best for the kids." Emily's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms tighter, a faint smirk playing on her lips.
Oh, now you want to talk about what's best for the kids? You should have thought about that before dragging this into court.
He clenched his jaw, feeling the frustration bubble up inside him, but he swallowed it down, trying to keep his voice steady.
I didn't want this, Emily. I never did. But you made me out to be the villain, and I couldn't just sit back and let you rewrite history.
She rolled her eyes, her expression cold.
Maybe I'm just doing what I have to, Kareem. You're not exactly innocent in all this, are you?
I'm not perfect, but I've been here.
He shot back, his voice growing more intense.
You know that. You know I've been the one raising them, keeping things together. But you left. You walked away when things got hard. And now you want to act like you're the one holding this family together?
For a moment, something flickered in Emily's eyes, something that almost looked like doubt, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening again.
You're so dramatic, Kareem. It's not that simple. You don't understand what it's like being trapped like I was.
Kareem felt his frustration spike, but he forced himself to take a step back, to breathe.
I'm not trying to win, Emily. I'm just trying to do right by our kids. They deserve better than this. Better than us tearing each other apart.
Emily looked away, her gaze drifting back out the window.
You don't get it, do you? You're trying to make this all about you, about your sacrifices. But I've sacrificed too, Kareem. And maybe I just don't want to keep sacrificing anymore.
He stared at her, trying to find the right words, trying to reach the part of her he used to know.
This isn't about us anymore. It's about them. You're hurting them, Emily. Even if you can't see it right now.
She turned back to him, her expression blank.
You don't get to lecture me on what's right for my kids, Kareem. I'm their mother, and I know what I'm doing.
Her voice was colder than he had ever heard it, and for the first time, Kareem felt a pang of something close to pity for her. He realized then that there was nothing he could say that would change her mind, no way to make her see what she was doing. He took a step back, letting the distance between them grow.
You know what, Emily? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't understand. But I do know that they'll see through all of this one day. They'll see who was there for them, who fought for them, even when it wasn't easy.
She said nothing, just watched him with that same unreadable expression as he turned and walked away. Kareem felt the weight in his chest shift slightly as he made his way back toward the courtroom, the quiet determination settling in his gut. He had tried to reach out, had tried to remind her that they were in this together, even if they couldn't be together anymore. But now he knew, whatever path Emily was on, she had chosen it long ago, and he couldn't follow her down it. As he walked back into the courtroom, Kareem's mind was clear. He had done what he could, said what he needed to say. Now it was up to the judge, the jury, and the truth that he had laid bare. He straightened his shoulders, steeling himself for whatever came next. He knew the battle wasn't over, but he also knew that he was ready to face it, for his kids and for himself. Emily stayed behind in the hallway, staring after him with a hard look in her eyes. Maybe there was a part of her that regretted the way things had turned out, but she pushed it down, refusing to let herself feel anything but the anger that kept her going. Whatever had once been between them, whatever hope she'd held that they could make things work, it was gone now, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of the choices she had made. Kareem returned to his seat, his shoulders tense, the weight of the confrontation still heavy on him. As the courtroom filled back up, he noticed how the atmosphere had shifted. It was as if the air was charged with anticipation, every eye flicking between him and Emily. They were waiting for a resolution, an ending to this messy, painful story. But all Kareem could think about was his kids, their faces, their smiles, the life he had fought so hard to preserve for them. The judge re-entered, and the room fell silent. Kareem kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, resisting the urge to glance over at Emily. This moment wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about their failed marriage or their differences. It was about proving that he was the father his children deserved. The judge's voice cut through the tension, stern and measured.
We've heard a lot today from both sides, and I have to admit, when this case began, I had a different perspective on the facts.
He paused, his gaze lingering on the stack of evidence that Kareem's lawyer had provided. Documents, photos, testimonials that painted a very different picture from the one Emily had tried to create. Kareem could feel his heart beating faster, each word from the judge echoing in his ears. He forced himself to stay still, to keep his face neutral, but he could sense the change. He wasn't sure yet if it was in his favor, but it was there. The judge turned his attention to Emily, who sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face unreadable.
Miss Smith, your testimony and claim suggested that you have been the primary caregiver for your children. However, the evidence provided contradicts much of what you've stated. Mr. Johnson's role in their daily lives appears to be far more significant than initially presented.
Kareem saw a flash of something cross Emily's face. Panic, maybe, or disbelief, but she kept her composure, her jaw set tightly. He watched as her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the judge, as if willing him to change his mind.
Mr. Johnson,
the judge continued, turning back to Kareem.
It's clear that you have been a consistent presence in your children's lives. The court recognizes the sacrifices you've made and the stability you've provided for them.
The judge's tone softened slightly, a hint of respect creeping into his voice.
Your dedication to your children has not gone unnoticed.
Kareem felt a rush of relief wash over him, but he kept his face steady, forcing himself to focus on each word. He wasn't out of the woods yet, but it was the first time he felt like he wasn't fighting an uphill battle. He risked a glance at his lawyer, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Emily's lawyer quickly stood up, trying to regain control. Your Honor, we must stress that my client has faced significant challenges. But the judge raised a hand, silencing him.
Challenges or not, the evidence speaks for itself. This court cannot ignore the facts that have been laid before us.
He glanced back at Emily, his expression hardening.
Miss Smith, there is also the matter of your withdrawals from the children's college savings account, which you did not disclose to this court.
A murmur swept through the courtroom, a ripple of surprise and judgment. Emily's face paled, and for the first time, her composure truly faltered. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out, her lawyer frantically shuffling through his notes beside her. Kareem watched, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, a pang of sadness. He had never wanted things to come to this, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing the truth finally come to light. He had been pushed to the brink, forced to fight for his name, for his kids, and now, finally, the lies were starting to unravel.
This court does not look kindly on deceit, especially when it concerns the welfare of children,
the judge said, his voice carrying a sharp edge.
Based on the evidence provided, the court finds that Mr. Johnson has demonstrated his ability to provide a stable and supportive environment for his children. Therefore, the primary custody will remain with Mr. Johnson, with a review of the financial arrangements to ensure the children's best interests.
Kareem felt his breath catch in his throat, the words hitting him like a wave. He had done it. He had fought for his kids and won. He glanced down, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he tried to steady himself. He wasn't sure if he wanted to shout in triumph or cry from the sheer relief that flooded through him. Across the room, Emily's expression had turned to stone. She stared at the judge, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For a moment, she looked over at Kareem, but he couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. It was about proving to himself, to his kids, and to the world that he was more than the narrative she had tried to create. The judge rapped his gavel, signaling the end of the session.
This court is adjourned. Thank you all.
The noise in the courtroom swelled as people began to gather their things, but Kareem barely heard it. He turned to his lawyer, shaking her hand with a quiet, heartfelt, "Thank you for everything." "You did this, Kareem," she replied, a genuine smile on her face. "You stood up for yourself and for your kids. Now go and be the father you've always been." Kareem nodded, a lump forming in his throat. As he made his way out of the courtroom, he felt the weight on his shoulders lift just a little. He still had challenges ahead. He knew that, but for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again, like he could focus on what truly mattered without the constant fear of losing everything he had worked for. He glanced back one last time, catching a glimpse of Emily as she spoke to her lawyer, her face pale and drawn. He felt a pang of sympathy for her, a part of him wishing things could have been different. But as he stepped into the sunlight outside, he pushed those thoughts aside, letting the warmth of the day wash over him. This battle was over, and he was going home to the people who mattered most, his kids. Kareem walked out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun hitting his face, warming him in a way that felt almost like relief. It was over. The battle, the constant worry, the fear of losing his children, it had all led to this moment. As he stood there, taking it all in, he thought of his kids waiting at home, their innocent faces filled with hope. He knew this victory wasn't the end of his struggles. Raising 2 kids on his own would have its challenges, but he also knew he had the strength to face them. The truth had come out, and he felt a sense of validation that had been missing for so long. He had proven to himself, and to everyone else, that he was capable of being the father his children deserved. Emily's words from their confrontation echoed in his mind. He couldn't understand her choices, her decision to walk away from their family, but he also realized that he couldn't keep dwelling on it. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. All he could do was focus on the future, on giving his kids the stability and love they needed. As he drove home, the weight that had been crushing his chest for months began to ease. He thought about the smiles he'd see when he walked through the door, the way his kids would throw their arms around him, not fully understanding what had happened, but knowing that their dad had come home to them. He arrived home, and as he stepped inside, his children ran to him, their laughter filling the air. "Daddy, you're home," they cried, hugging him tightly. Kareem knelt down, wrapping them in his arms, feeling a wave of emotion swell within him.
I told you I'd always be here.
He whispered to them, holding them close, feeling the warmth of their embrace. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to savor the moment. Whatever came next, he knew he could handle it, because for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a future worth fighting for. As the days turned into weeks, Kareem found a new rhythm in his life. Each morning, he woke up to the sound of his children's laughter, and each night, he tucked them in, knowing they felt safe and loved. He focused on the little things, the bedtime stories, the trips to the park, the quiet moments when they would sit together and share their day. It wasn't always easy, but he took pride in every small victory. Emily's absence lingered like a shadow, but Kareem had learned to let it go. He no longer waited for her calls or hoped for a change of heart. He knew that whatever path she had chosen, it wasn't one that included their family, and that was okay. He had made peace with the fact that he couldn't control her choices, only his own. Kareem found strength in his role as a father, realizing that he had become more than he ever thought he could be. He was no longer just the man fighting for custody. He was the parent who showed up every day, who wiped away tears, helped with homework, and made pancakes on Saturday mornings. His children looked at him with trust in their eyes, knowing that he would always be there for them. One evening, as the kids played in the backyard, Kareem sat on the porch, watching them chase fireflies. The air was warm, the sky painted with the colors of a fading sunset. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm settle over him, the kind he hadn't felt in a long time. "We did it," he murmured to himself, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It wasn't the ending he had imagined, but it was a new beginning, and as he listened to his children's laughter echoing through the twilight, Kareem knew that it was enough.